Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of 2025 for One Take because life has no rehearsal. Today, I am truly, absolutely honored to bring Jack Hobbs, who is the sensei of podcast. Jack went from a successful pitching and the Major League Baseball for real, I have seen pictures, to a very successful career with Univision, actually right from the start, when it wasn't even Univision, when it was SIN, Spanish International Network. So we're talking about President creation, and then he pivoted once again and he created Revolver, as you can see in his t-shirt, a little bit of self-promotion. And Revolver is the leading podcast in the US Hispanic market. So welcome, Sensei. It's an honor to have somebody who has created a successful podcast
Wow.
company.
Wow. I'm not going to start believing my own headlines here because, that's when you get in trouble. First of all,
Yes.
thank you, with a wholehearted Happy New Year and hope we have a great year, both of us. And no, that was quite an opening and quite I hope I live up to all the expense there and all the suspense and expense of being your first your first guest. Hope I don't ruin your show for the year, or you got a good way to build from here.
Well,
Anyway,
you raised
thank
the
you so
bar. You
much.
raised the bar, Jack.
Thank you so much.
So we've talked about how people, call it POA, people of age, if we're gonna be, trendy about it, instead of POCs.
Yeah.
Well, we're POAs, and we've talked about, like we've had many, many, many decisive moments. But every so often we do have one. And it's a kind of moment that looking back is when we realize, shit, that was really, really a decisive moment. I told you about my McCann Mexico one. What was your decisive moment? The moment that made Jack Hobb professional?
Well, as I thought about the question, I had several. One, after getting out of baseball and trying to figure out what I was going to do after working as an intern at KYW and Channel 3 in Philadelphia, I interviewed for SIN, going from Major League Baseball into a media business where I knew nothing about media. I couldn't have spelled media if you gave me the M and the A. And I started working with great people at, Raul Tarano, René Anselmo, John Piro, quite a few of these, folks that really put me in a place to succeed. That was number one. Number two was after the integration of Univision and Univision Radio, we started to go on a ramp that just went, through the roof. We went from zero in revenue with, the Hispanic broadcasting group that Univision bought. We went from zero in revenue, again, not being able to spell radio if you gave me the R and the O. It sounds like I'm kind of illiterate, but those are media terms I really didn't know too much about since I was a TV guy. Then getting out of radio and seeing that we had really, and my team was at blame because we put and jammed in so many units into a radio stop set, we started to see TSL do this. At that point, I saw the digital side of things start to really ramp up. And, while I was, looking for the third iteration, the major decision I made was, along with Stephen Hobbs and Tracy Dorman, we went into the digital space with Revolver Podcast. And, it was, let me tell you, I ate ramen for the first 2 years. That's, you talk about a decision. That was a painful decision to go into digital when it was just at the cusp of English market, general market, and then getting in for Spanish. It was back to 1980s again in Spanish television. But, I knew the tail of the dog. I knew it was going to come. And we were really, really lucky because we had some of the best and still have some of the best creators and producers in the marketplace on Revolver Podcast. And that was, getting into the digital side, what was truly the fastest and best way to rebound after a radio or terrestrial radio career. It was where the market's going. Remember, you got to look to where the puck's going to be, not where it's at. And not that I'm a hockey player, But it's just knowing what's out there and what the next generation is going to be listening to, viewing, experiencing.
Well, let's even take it a step back, right? Because you joined SIN. SIN was nothing. Even I wasn't in the US. I was either living in Mexico, Argentina, or someplace. But like, I know that SIN was like nothing.
They were
And then
small.
it
Yeah.
grew. Now, I interviewed before Doug Darfield. Doug Darfield was, in my
They
opinion,
used the sensei of research.
yes, Doug Darfield was the guy, the unsung hero of the US Hispanic market.
Yep.
Because television is sold on ratings.
Yep.
And by the way, I went from
Validated. Yep.
creative into media. So I went from creative to like numbers, and I had to learn everything, right? So I started from scratch. So the same thing, I didn't know a rating from a hole in the wall, but there I am. So Doug actually defined that, and with Doug, all of a sudden, Spanish language television became like a real respected network.
Like a real
That was
business.
a real business. No, no, for real. And they hired Joe Uva as the CEO in order to increase the CPMs. So that was a major, major change.
Right.
And then, of course, Doug, in one of the conferences that I organized with the IAA, he announced officially that Nielsen ratings were going to go away. But the market by then was solidified. So you saw that big change. Then you saw the other big change with broadcast television. Broadcast television sort of, was hit by cable. Then cable was absolutely wounded by streaming, and the whole market just has evolved, like in many different ways, full of acronyms like fast and fast TVs and stuff.
MVDBO, DBBO.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what changed? Because everybody has that moment in which they look at their market and they say, "Whoa, what happened there?" So
Well,
what changed? Have you
and
seen?
Marcelo, it's a great question. It's a great question. Yeah. What changed when I was in my other career as a professional baseball player, I lived in Venezuela, I lived in Puerto Rico, I lived in the Dominican in 5 or 6 successive years. And I would, down there, if I wasn't watching Flipper, because Flipper didn't really speak, that was the only TV you could watch in Caracas, Venezuela at the time. And I thought, I don't know why I thought, I said, this is going to be big in New York. That's what I thought, big in New York. And that's when I first got the invitation to interview with SIN. My mom said, Spanish TV. What the devil is that? And that was my first. I was the first gringo in the marketplace. And Javier Saralegui, who is Javier was at Univision for a long time with me. He and I lived next door to each other on East 82nd. He goes, dude, you're the only white boy in the business. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. But that was my first moment of corporate reality and getting into SIN and watching it grow. I thought, okay, 3 years here, boom, I'm going to go over to ABC. Well, it became 3, and then another 3, and then another 5, and then another 15. And because the upward growth of the marketplace coincided with that decision, it was incredible. It really was. I went through all the the hallmarks, all the critters that came through. First Chicago, the essence of what we had never changed. It was reaching and super serving the Hispanic marketplace. But overall, for me personally, that was walking into that office at 42nd and 10th in the National Video Building was where I made my first career move. The second one, and the most important, I think, was I started to see the change at Univision when they brought some other gentlemen in, and they was getting into a verified real business, and that's when I made the shift into Hispanic broadcasting. That decision going from network television into radio, like I said, give me the R and the O, and I still didn't know how to spell it, but I knew how to build a network, and I knew how to build the relationships at the agencies from a revenue and content standpoint. Those were really important times because it was very turbulent in times in the media business, and that was That's one example. Knowing where the puck is going, Mac Tishner, Jeff Hinson saw that the network business was growing every year. And that's why we built the network. And then obviously we had other competitors. Now getting into the digital side of things, listen, unfortunately, the space is being bought by 23, 24-year-old buyers who don't know how to turn on a radio and don't know where the radio is. They know about earbuds, Sirius, and, well, we like Sirius XM because they're my sales partner. Plug. But, you know, if you have people that don't eat the media, don't, you know, consume the media, and don't listen to the media, how are they going to buy the media? So this
Well,
is important.
let me just drop something in there because, in all fairness, when I moved to Mexico in 1986, somebody came over. Actually, not somebody. Carlos Herranz came over, the CEO, McCann. Says, listen, you need to negotiate the local World Cup package for Coca-Cola. And I said, the local world package of what? So he said, the World Cup. What's the World Cup?
Uh-oh. No
Soccer.
consumption.
So I was all of 30, maybe not 24, but I was 30, and I had never ever watched a World Cup. And my whole experience with soccer, football, that we call football, was I lived next to the Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid, in Cayorense. And every so often I would go to a game with my best friend Mike. So on the one hand, yes, there's a lot of people who seem to be buying media with no clue. On the other hand, yeah, I've been guilty. I mean, like, what can I tell you, man? So,
Well, you better have done a really quick ramp up on that because I remember those World Cup packages when they were going out to Coca-Cola because Univision had had the U.S. rights and it was crazy. So you got a real quick education is what I'm hearing.
oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And the
Yep.
same thing. The only one that I knew for real, I negotiated the very first Formula One in Mexico for Goodyear, and I had driven a Formula 3, so I actually knew what it felt like.
Well, your experiential is very important right there.
But no, I agree. That has been one change. There's been a changing of the guard in terms of how people
Agreed.
even see
Agreed.
what media is. And I had that fight a lot. I had the fight because every so often people will say, I'm in marketing. And then the correct answer is, we're all in marketing. However, SEO is not marketing.
Yeah,
SEO is a slice of marketing. It is a tool used in marketing.
that's a
So I
fact.
think there's been a degradation also of what marketing and media and advertising in general is.
Well, you start to see some degradation even in the sales process. A lot of this now is, how do I get a programmatic pipe into my shows and call it a day? No salespeople, no, I mean, listen, the bottom line is agencies nowadays, you know, try to get a dinner, try to get a lunch, try to build a relationship. Again, forget about it. It's computer or it's programmatic or it's very rarely will you see an advertiser come back and say, "Listen, I need a custom plan for my brand X that'll incorporate X amount of markets." And you look at the things like shopper marketing that are still very viable elements in the Hispanic marketplace. I'm not trying to date, but I mean, getting a product into somebody's hand, I still think there's a value to it.
Yes.
Uh, and the combination of old school and new school and digital, I think is a very valuable element to get it out there. That's why when I looked at what I have the largest quote unquote terrestrial digital broadcast group in the country. Piolín, Ernesto, Sotelos, Cheto. These guys are like the top of the food chain. And this is not a plug. This is a reality. These guys move people to
Yes.
where they are, where they're at a remote or, not remotes. They don't even do remotes anymore. Store events. I've seen Erasmo pull 3,000, 4,000 people. I've seen Piolín bring in 2,500, 3,000 people. these are still significant numbers from a crowd slash audience embrace. It's a shame that the one thing I haven't been able to figure out is how radio terrestrial hasn't started to figure out that the digital element of what we do is an important element as an additive to their deliveries.
Yes.
Univision has, they're one of, all clarity here, they are an investor. They're my number one investor. And they were there when I needed them. And, they have their podcast platform, but again, they're competitive with me, but, it should be additive. We should be working it together. And I think agencies would probably like to see that. Buyers would probably like to see that. And, the next thing that's coming is the video elements of this. So, knowing where the puck is, as I said before, is knowing where the video elements all are going to line up for the audio, video, and then obviously who knows what's next. I'll try to figure that out by July. But, there are significant, moves in this marketplace that it's constantly changing. And, you have to be on it, or you're going to be. It's going to be over. It's going to run you over.
Yes. No. I wrote an article some time back about there is no next. There is many nexts. One of my nexts is going to be audience segmentation, because if you remember back, it was like, oh yeah, women 18 to 54. They're like, excuse me, that
A little
includes
broad. It's a little broad.
Yeah, no, that includes my wife, who owns, used to own a Cadillac, and now she owns a Mercedes that she bought because she one day went to the garage and said, "Get rid of this Cadillac and buy a Mercedes." That's it. So that includes my wife, who makes a decision like that. And that
Your show
includes my
must be
daughter,
doing really well,
who
Marcel.
has yeah. No, that the 18 to 54 doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And right now, I've done projects where we have even done predictive modeling on the type of woman who will have plastic surgery. So here we are going from 18 to 54 to predicting when women over 45 are going to have plastic surgery. So I think audience segmentation is my next. But I don't think it's going to be a
How
niche.
about men? Men are allowed to have plastic surgery as well, Marcel.
What does that mean?
Do not remember. You're cutting out a whole side of the equation there.
Not in value. Like
That's true.
about 85% of plastic surgeries are women. And not only
Right.
that, one of the things I found, if we're going to talk about, for example, direct response metrics, the lifetime value of women who have plastic surgery is immense. Like, for example, my sister had about 3 or 4. That's a lot of money, man. That's like a good $40,000 lifetime value. So
Your sister better not be watching this video.
no, my sister passed away in
Oh, I'm sorry.
2019.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So yeah, but she had I use her as an example of lifetime value. So to end, you are a fly in the wall, but you have the ear of a CEO or a CMO. They're interviewing candidates all over the place. They see people like me and they assume, or people like you, and they say, oh yeah, they're not digitally native. And of course that's BS, as we know. But what do you tell a CEO or a CMO about the advantages of hiring people like us? And by the way, I think that the new slogan is going to be, we're POA, not DOA. POA being, of
Well,
course, people of age.
I've dealt with some people who are definitely DOA.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We all have.
We
Look,
all have.
in this world, and please don't let me go off on a soapbox, but there's gender bias, there's racial bias, but the biggest thing that I've seen, and I started to see many years ago, was that magic number of 58. Once you get near that 58, holy shit, they're coming after you, right?
Yeah.
And now if you're doing your job and you're top of your line, but I remember, that number that's when, you start thinking, or they start thinking eyeball, the collective corporate world. But, evaluating people on age because they're either making too much money, Is it, is it consistent with our look? Look, I think Zuckerberg said young people are smarter. Well, I want to hear what he has to say in about 10 years when he's, an older guy. But, if I were advising a CEO, remember, you get what you pay for in terms of that experience, that ability to, that they know the business, they know the routes. You're not gonna have to worry about an older guy coming in with his hoodie, worrying about oat milk or freaking half milk for his cereal. He's not gonna be upset about talking about gender misrepresentation, he, she, they, or cat, or whatever the hell they're called these days. It looks as though there's a competitive advantage to having experienced people out there. And I know the HR departments are happy when you get somebody who's a little older and a little bit more experienced. But it's an interesting place to be because I would rather have an experienced person in my org telling me and knowing that they know the right place to go and to either get the money or get the talent or get the event. It's a very, very difficult time to be in an HR position right now. It really is, because if you look at somebody's cross-eyed, they'll come in and report you that you're looking at them differently. And when I just happen to have a bad eye, I don't know. But I would tell the CEO to go. You really have to go with the person who's experienced, knows the routes, and is best for the brand being the company. And if you're going to have to worry about that person out in Las Vegas at an event at CES being offended by somebody that had too many drinks, you know what? Nobody goes through life without being triggered. It happens. That's why it's work. Get over it.
Excellent. Well, Sensei, it's been a real pleasure.
No, it hasn't. Come on, don't lie. Don't lie. You gave me a soapbox. I was going to go off.
Of course.
I would be remiss. I would be remiss in mentioning that I do have Sensei 2, I guess. Joe Yuba is on my, talk about following up on that note you just said. But Joe is my chairman.
Wow.
So I walk the walk when I say what I just said. So Joe and Jeff Hinson have been incredibly helpful in my build of this platform. Again, I hate to use the word older, experienced, seasoned executives that know the route, know people, and have the respect and reputation in the marketplace.
That's important. They have the respect.
Yes, sir.
They have the respect.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, thank you very much, Jack.
That's all you can ask for.
I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Anything I can do for you, let me know.
Thank you.
My door is always open. You know that.
Yep, absolutely. Bye-bye.
Hey, it's me, Cole.